We'll be reviewing a beloved Hollywood film today about a young lady who wants to live in Paris but can't find a place to call home. She goes up to an elderly guy who inexplicably offers to give her a room in exchange for something. What happens next? Watch the whole program to learn more. An old guy named Henry lives alone in Paris. A young lady from a far-off city named Constance is making her 6th try at passing her driving exam, but she is having difficulty once again. She helps her father with his company, but she also has aspirations of relocating to Paris, which worries her father when she tries to locate a place to live there. Constance meets Henry, who, despite his advanced age, behaves eccentrically. Though Henry himself was against having any renters, Henry's son had made arrangements to rent out a room in Henry's home. Constance knows that nobody is allowed near the piano in the home. Constance finds Henry to be extremely impolite, even though she is captivated to the mansion, and she thinks that he is reluctant to take her in as a renter. She keeps looking for a place to stay after leaving Henry's residence. Constance finds out that she has gotten a room in Henry's home, while her goal of moving to Paris is coming true when she becomes engaged with a married guy called Arthur. Arthur seems relieved that she's gone, but she finds this disappointing. After saying goodbye to her mother and brother a few days later, Constance relocates to Paris. She finds a book with house rules when she gets to Henry's place, the first of which prohibits anybody from using Henry's slippers. Constance finds out that evening that Henry doesn't like his daughter-in-law. Days later, when he was left alone at home, Valerie confides in her that she was constantly called insane and accused of intending to put him in a nursing facility. Constance believes that she learnt to play the piano as a youngster, but lost interest in it over time. Henry walks away, not happy with their requests. Despite not having enough money to pay the rent, Constance is able to convince him to let her remain. Henry considers his options and suggests a bargain in place of paying rent. He needs Constance's assistance to ruin his son Paul's marriage by luring him into reluctantly agreeing. Taking into account that the offer would pay her rent for a whole year, Constance makes a decision. As she exits the home, thinking about her predicament, she spots a pub that needs a waitress. She is employed right away after approaching Matthew, a young guy, for the position. The next morning, Paul, Henry's son, pays him a visit and is always conscious of his father's negative comments about him. Paul's motivations are not evident. Paul came to see Henry as his health declined with age, bringing medicine and requesting ongoing attention. When Henry came back, he made fun of Paul right away, which made him leave. Henry seemed happy, taking Constance meeting with Paul the next day as an effort to further their relationship. Despite her worries about her academic performance, Constance started working at the bar while juggling her academics and her attempts to get to know Henry. Paul and Valerie were asked over for supper by Henry, and Constance made a spectacular feast to wow them. Constance soon saw why Henry didn't like Valerie. After all, Constance could easily comply with Henry's request since Valerie was a cunning lady. Constance started to flirt with Paul, making the bashful young guy smile with her light-hearted banter. They discussed the piano in Henry's home, which was originally owned by Henry's wife but is now off-limits. Henry and Paul got into an argument as a result, and Henry told Constance to play the piano. Henry started crying while Constance sang and performed. Valerie thought he didn't enjoy the music, but Paul said that Henry was moved to tears by the song since it made him think of his late wife. Paul proposed that they go the next day since Valerie was preoccupied with her dinner and was unable to process the emotional event. When Constance got her college test results, she realized she had failed once again. Disappointed, she went home in tears, feeling pessimistic about her future. Valerie went to Henry's home shortly thereafter to get her dishes, but she became sick and puked into them. Overcome by her own suffering, Constance sobbed in front of Henry and Valerie, refusing to work at her father's business and bemoaning her inability to go home. Henry told her to follow her interests. Because of Valerie's persistent prodding, Constance, who had given up on her piano playing because of a depressing school instructor and her father's lack of encouragement for Henry, performed a song she had composed and received appreciation from Henry for the first time. When Constance asked about Henry's late wife, she discovered that she had died 30 years ago in a horrific fall from a window, leaving Henry alone ever since Constance started laughing out of response. Valerie saw this as a sign that she liked Paul, and Constance then made an effort to talk to Henry about the situation. Constance refused to work for Henry because she thought Valerie was really in love with Paul, despite Henry's insistence that Valerie had been with Paul for financial gain for years. As a result, Henry gave her the order to leave the home the next day. When Constance went back to her parents' house, she found her room had been changed into an office. When faced with this, she told her parents a falsehood, saying that she had completed her examinations and had to go back to Paris right away. She felt obliged to continue entertaining Paul, so she grudgingly returned to Henry's home. Feeling hopeless about her chances, she started asking Henry about Paul's preferences in order to forward this strategy. As Henry tried to get Constance enrolled in a music school, she discovered optimism. Using the details Henry had given her about his preferences, she started to gently draw Paul in and gave the impression that they had a lot in common. When Constance proposed dating, Paul began to feel something real for her, even though he was oblivious of the scam. Paul said no, citing their age difference. Constance hated herself for being part of the deception after being rejected, but Henry reassured her that the intention was only to destroy Paul's marriage, not to keep it together. A few days later, Constance was more interested in a DJ called Simon than she was in Matthew, a lad from the pub, who indicated his wish to go with her. When he realized this, Matthew pulled away. Just as Paul expressed his desire to begin a relationship with Constance and professed his affections for her, Constance's short connection with Simon started. Paul went to the club with Constance, where Matthew was a DJ, knowing that she was going to have an affair. While driving back home, Constance sensed that Simon had already forgotten about her. Though Paul felt he had finally won her over, he consoled her despite her repeated lamentations about her difficult existence. Valerie became concerned when Paul went out late, and soon she found proof of his adultery. Valerie exited the home, proving that Henry's strategy worked. Paul avoided Constance for 2 days in spite of this. Constance found out one evening that Henry had applied to the London School of Music on her behalf and had even given her a recommendation to a well-known pianist. One day, Paul returned to visit Constance. Constance indicated to Paul that she had met someone her same age and that she wanted to move on from their past relationship. Having lost both Valerie and Constance, Paul was inconsolable. Valerie's lawyer told him she was filing for divorce, which only made things worse. When Valerie told Paul she was pregnant, everything seemed to be coming apart. The news restored their marriage, but when Paul told Henry about it, Henry gave him a harsh look and asked whether they really intended to keep the kid in despair. Paul threatened to cut off contact with his father if he did not respond well to Valerie's news. Paul also broke the news while maintaining a steady smile. Restored contentment, Constance was happy with him, but her happiness was short-lived, as her father insisted that she come home after finding out she had failed her test. Constance informed Henry, who said that even if a father had attempted, he shouldn't be allowed to take away his child's happiness. Paul called this insincerity out. Henry then disclosed that alcohol was the cause of his wife's death. She had fallen from the building while inebriated. Constance started getting ready to depart the next morning. After Paul and Valerie came to visit her, the three of them waited for Henry for a number of hours. Valerie informed him about the baby once he got back. Henry pretended to be happy, but he could not keep up the pretense long since Constance was ready to leave. Henry told her to follow her dreams now rather than waiting till she was elderly. Moved by his remarks, Constance addressed her father and adamantly refused to go back home. Constance insisted on remaining in Paris and said that she wanted to become a pianist. Her father protested at first, but he quickly saw that Constance shared his determination. Eventually, Henry's loneliness subsided, and Constance spent months studying hard at the home for her music test. She wrote her own song by perseverance and hard effort, and ultimately it was time for her to go to London. Henry, who had always supported Constance as he had his wife, never wavered in his belief in her ability. When Constance got at the London School of Music, she studied hard for her last test. She completed the test in many rounds with success. She learnt about Henry's demise and came home a few weeks later. Paul told her that Henry had been happy in his last days since he had seen his grandchild and saw Constance succeed. Constance disclosed that she had not passed the exam's last round. She needed to spend a few more months in Paris, so Paul gave her Henry's home. Paul handed Constance the home and one more letter from Henry. Henry said that he had found peace after meeting his grandchild and gave guidance and forgiveness. Constance was inspired by him to never give up. Encouraged by Henry's remarks, Constance started resolving to study for her next test, which resulted in an optimistic and successful outcome. I really hope